No, don't do this now.
I didn't even know.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Well, we are now live. Thank you for everybody joining us. I'm Wayne Hunter with AvTek Solutions, and we do this once a month and to talk about all kinds of different topics. And most of the time, it's about topics people just don't want to talk about because you're like, oh man, I got to talk about that again. But it's always good rehashing things. And today I have one of our partners on, Mr. Connor, and we're going to talk about security awareness training, but we're going to talk about it from an aspect that I get a lot of customers talk to me about. It says, frustrating this, why am I doing this? And I can't get my users to do this, various different things. So I started researching it a little bit and come up with the top 10 drawbacks companies, people had with security awareness training in 2024. And I want to approach it from the standpoint of what it is, but how we, and when I say we, Phin and AvTek Solution, address these things so we're not in that mode, because security awareness training now is not one of these nice to have things anymore. Uh, Cybersecurity insurance, various different industry, whether it be government, state, local, industry-based compliance requirements, call it out. It's must have. You don't have it in place, that actually can hurt you in more than just an audit standpoint, but financially. Cybersecurity insurance has called it out now today to where if that's one of those things you're not doing it, then that policy might not pay out. And today, even if you go to the FBI's website, still today, business email compromise is the top place where we get hacked. Oh, still well over 90%. And it's been that way for years. And the sad part about it is security awareness training called out by the FBI is the number one reason why that's still that way, is because we just don't do it. We're too busy. We ain't got time for this, but it's so crucial to do. So what do you think about that, Connor? That sound like a good way to attack things today?
I think that sounds like a great conversation that I may or may not have a few thoughts on.
So Katie is here today, and she's going to be kind of our moderator of the questions. She's got them, and so part of these I have not even seen yet. So this is the fun part. I love this off the cuff piece, but we'll just see how well we do here, Connor. So let's see if she can put us to the test.
We get the real Wayne Hunter. We don't get the prim
Yeah, you
proper
don't get the.
prepared.
No.
Yeah.
I hate to rehearse stuff. I'd rather come off the cuff and where it comes in, because it's if I don't know it, how can I help my customers, right?
That's true.
So it's important. So now they get to see, just how well we're doing our job, man.
or how much you don't know about this. I don't know.
There
We'll
you
find
go.
out together.
You never know. Exactly. All right, Miss Katie, lead us up.
Okay. All right. So, kickoff question: why do you think security awareness remains such a struggle for organizations despite advancements in training methods?
Connor, give me your perspective, and I'll give you mine. I'm going to let you go first this time since you're one of our honored guests.
There's a couple of things that we've identified over the last, it's almost 5 years at this point that we've been running security awareness training programs. The first is that many times the content that does get delivered isn't relevant to an individual. It may be relevant to a company. And actually, as we were talking about before this went live, it's like cyber insurance requires this, industry requirements require this. And so even while training can be relevant to your company, it may not be relevant to a specific person in that organization. And so you guys probably receive support tickets all the time that are like, hey, like I didn't like this. Like I didn't like the content that was put in front of me. And a lot of that doesn't come necessarily from the way the content uh, is animated or maybe it's live action. It's like this wasn't relevant to me at all. So I'm in sales. Why the heck do I have to know about collecting and storing payment information, or what does it mean? What is PII and what would fall under that? And so you can do, you can slip up on that once or twice with an individual, but if you just repetitively give things that aren't relevant to that individual's role and their responsibilities, even though it may be required as a company for you to go through that, they just check out. And when they check out, they're going to use things like ChatGPT's new agent to just complete all of their training for them because they can, or they'll put it on their second monitor and mute it and walk away. So even though, as Katie mentioned, it's like, wow, there have been so many advancements in the content that gets delivered, the training that gets delivered, and also how we're doing this so it doesn't interrupt your day. a lot of people just still check out because it's still not relevant. It's a very difficult problem to solve.
That was the interesting part of it is coming into that, and we've always approached it from what is the role of the people. So we don't run into that a lot of people saying it's not relevant, but what we do run into is them understanding when it is relevant to them and they don't think it is. That's the bigger thing that we run into is, and we have to educate them, is because these things are changing over time. And you talk like PII. Why does a salesperson think, why is that relevant to me?
Yeah.
Well, PII information is not just social security numbers no more.
Yep.
It's changed. It is name, address, email address, and now PII because of all the B2B, all the supply chain hacks, all that stuff is being used to re-engineer coming in from a social attack, stuff like that. So now it's educating these people about it is relevant to you and this is why it's important. So if you don't do that, and that's not only from a company perspective, but an individual perspective, and that education has to happen. That's what we're seeing more of than anything else. It's having to educate them it is relevant. And also, why is it relevant to them from a company standpoint is because there's policies that says you must do this. But just because you must do it, we still need to make sure they understand why they need to do it and why it is relevant. So relevancy, I would agree, is probably the number one reason people don't do it, is they don't understand the relevance of it to themselves and in their job.
I think a piece that goes along with that, there is I don't want to say it exists in every company. It definitely does. Nobody speaks in absolutes but Siths anyway, so I'm not going to do that. Tying the leadership and leadership decisions clearly into why the training is important is not something that I see happening as much as I want. For instance, whenever I will join a partner of ours support call, and they're like, "Hey, I'm having trouble getting my users to do this." It's like, well, this isn't these aren't your employees. You do work with this company. So first off, it's like who at the company, who at the client that you work with needs to be involved in this decision. They're like, well, I don't know. It's like, well, you really need to go get that person, because are you going to be the one following up with these people when they're not compliant with their cyber insurance to make sure it's going to pay out? And they're like, no, that sounds horrible. I'm like, yeah, great. But somebody needs to. So who is that going to be? It's not going to be us, because we're even further removed from the client's employees than you are. This is something you see in cybersecurity in general. Is like, what is the CISO's place in decision making at the executive level, at the leadership team meetings? And I think a lot of progress has been made over the last couple of years, but I still think there is a lack of how does this actually translate into things that are viewed as important by the executive team in the rest of the company. And I always go by expect what you inspect. And if that's not something your leadership team's reviewing on a regular basis, it's just not something that's going to gradually, it's not going to be important on its own. So
that's the reason why we took the stance is all our SAT training we provide to our end customers is ran out of our compliance department. Because and I'm a little different. Not every MSP has a compliance department.
Yeah.
Because we do compliance as a service, compliance readiness as a service. So we do that. And so we actually, our compliance officer will actually get with the customer, whether it's a sole proprietor all the way up to enterprise, because we got them on that range, and sit and talk about it and making sure the training is done to meet their requirements and educate them why. So we take it that step further to make sure the buy-in's where it needs to be, because if we're supplying a service and they don't get it, they're not going to use that service. And that actually creates a problem for us. I think the MSPs out there that are doing this stuff for their end customers, they got to remember when they sign that contract with that customer, they just accepted shared responsibility and shared liability of those services. So I think your point about the partners need to be involved and with that management, make sure that carries through. That's extremely important. So,
yeah,
great question. How was that, Katie? That good response for the first question?
Yeah, that took up about like 7 minutes. So let's.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Are we talking
too much? Not enough? What?
No, it's good. It's great. It's fantastic. Kind of in the same realm, how has the rapidly evolving threat landscape made it more difficult for organizations to keep up?
I'll take first this time. Part of it is depending on the size of business, they don't always have someone dedicated to be up on this stuff. Okay. They got their own business running off and going, and they don't have someone to keep them up to speed. And so they get behind. And that's where we come into place to make sure it's all about education, making sure they know what's going on and making sure they're right. It ties back to the first question we had, like I said, how we engage to make sure that company ownership all the way through the customer we're supporting with this knows about the changes and why it's relevant to them. So part of that goes, the big hole there is a lot of the SMB, small business, even medium business, don't have people out there that's staying up on this and understanding how the training needs to be modified or catch up to where they're at. Now, Connor, from your perspective, I think it's a little bit different because now you're developing the training, and how's the rapid stuff changing affect you and being able to bring the content that we need to deliver to that end client?
I would phrase it like this. One of the most impactful things you can do to change people's behavior, I'm not saying it's a silver bullet, but it is something that you can attempt to do, is to deliver training more frequently. Don't just blast it all at the end of the year and say, hey, the goal was by December 31, and I'll be damned if December 29 came around and everyone got it done that day. It's like, it's not going to be effective over the course of the year of helping people recognize the situations they're in. And so I'll say this, the prevalence, and I hate to use AI as any example, but if you don't want to use the word AI, tools are changing faster. The threats that people are exposed to are changing faster because a wider group of people around the world have access, and have now access to education to do dangerous things with US or any kind of business around the world.
Right.
And so if you are training people once every 12 months or on a top, you're training people every month, but only on a topic once every 12 months. There's another 11 months out of the year where the speed at which people are getting access to tools and technology and education to then attack other businesses it's moving so quick that maybe I'll use business email compromise. If you got an educational business email compromise, maybe by 6 months later, the way that most business email compromise occurs looks completely different. And we saw that last year and in 2023 with MFA fatigue attacks. It's like those weren't really a thing, or at least it wasn't so popular as a method of attack up until maybe 2023, 2022, when everyone started going remote and enforcing that as a result of COVID. So to tie this back to the question, it's like, why, like it's all changing so quickly. What do you do? I think the answer is you need to have training it's not delivered on a set cadence for compliance. Like this needs to be training outside of compliance. That's like, if you're working with a manufacturing client, Wayne, you're like, hey guys, yeah, we've noticed a set of attacks. It's hitting manufacturing clients. It's going to look like this. We added some training. You're going to have a lot of people that, hey Wayne, I hate you for this. Why are you making me do training? But then you're going to have another set of people. So that's first, get over that. I guess that's my advice to Wayne. But then my other advice is like, then you're going to have another set of people. It's like, wait, this is actually happening. I had no clue. And then it's an opportunity for you to engage in conversation. Like, yeah, let me tell you about all the threats you aren't aware of.
And I think that's one of the things that it's an approach how you do that training. If you come in and you're taking 20 minutes, 30 minutes of training and doing this kind of stuff, that's one thing. And I think what I really like about what we do today with the tool sets you have is we call it micro training, right? And so it'll be something, it may only take you 3 minutes to get through the training. You're doing it and you quickly test on it and move on. And that's easy to ingest and come and do that. But also is, okay, some people would say, well, that's really short. Are they really going to get anything out of it? Well, we'll know. And if we don't, we catch up that training and do additional micro training based on something they do. So I think the part about it, waiting to the end of the year, trying to get it all done, and it is that unscheduled, have the flexibility to send out that training in a way that's very easily congestible by them and gives them that quick little hit. And they're going, well, why did they send me that? What's that about? And it actually induces them to actually educate themselves about what's going on. That makes it easier. We found that approach is one, that we don't get people complaining about it. And two, we start getting tickets in there and say, hey, are we protected against this? Or is our security stack taking care of this? We start getting questions like that. So being creative on that training actually, I think, helps mitigate that. And we're doing it more often So that way we're staying up with things. So it's really on how you deploy that platform and what you're going to do in that scenario.
Yeah. I think it's important to separate training that's done for compliance purposes and then training that's done for security purposes.
Right.
And they can overlap. They're not, completely separate things, but there are a set of that you had mentioned it earlier. It's like, hey, why am I doing this? Well, you work in an industry that requires this kind of training. How is this relevant to me? Do I need to restate that you work in an industry that like that is the relevance? And then there's other things where it's like, hey, we're going to educate you on attacks that are going to come in through a mobile device because you've been provisioned a mobile device by your work. They're like, why is this relevant to me? It's like, well, this isn't relevant to things that you need to understand as a result of working in your industry, but this is relevant because you do have a phone and this exposes you to this kind of attacks. There you go. Different kind of training.
I agree.
A quick story I have around that. We were discussing GDPR requirements and how we would have to operate as a company in order to be GDPR compliant and work with some overseas opportunities that we have in front of us. And so I was asking a whole bunch of questions. It's like, can anyone just I don't need to go spend a couple $1,000s with my lawyers trying to get them to explain to me what that would mean. It's like, somebody just give me the quick hits. Like, what's going on? And somebody in my company unmutes and they're like, well, Connor, if you would have done the training that literally we scheduled for last month to prepare for this topic, you would know the answer to every question. And it was like, shit, you're right. Don't answer the question. I'm gonna go do my training, and I'll see you guys in a couple of days. Like when we meet again, I will be. And then, sure enough, watched the video. It was like 10 minutes long on GDPR compliance. Answered all the questions. It's like I answered every single question that I had for those guys. So yeah, a little bit of put up or shut up right there.
It's kind of like practice what you preach.
Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do. And then instantly, it's like I am literally doing every single trope that I make fun of other companies for. Like I would never do that. It's like the people who are most targeted at the company are those who have the most access, which are typically those who have the most seniority via title. It's like, oh, yeah, but I would never do that. And then it's like all of a sudden, all this came into my head. I was like, wait a second. Like I am the issue that I tell people that they should have issues with. It's like I need to rethink something.
There you go. Lead by example.
Yeah, I went and I did it. I went.
Okay, yeah. All right, so the next question kind of draws back into something that Connor mentioned earlier about the relevancy. I'm in sales. Why does, that type of, so why is tailoring training to each department's specific needs so critical, and what are the risks of sticking with a one-size-fits-all approach?
Well, I think today one of the big things is it's actually being called out. We work with we do banking, financial, stuff like that, which is highly regulated and stuff like that. But also from the compliance side, whether it be New York DFS, whether it be Shield Act, whether it be all these different things, even cybersecurity insurance, it's now being called out that people need to be trained based on, just going back to just the comment before, is their role. And because me as a CEO, I have my threat landscape's much larger and has a bigger impact than Katie's would as a marketing coordinator inside of here. So one of the things I need to make sure I'm making myself aware of is what is my exposure and how do I recognize that exposure from my perspective, because of the financial systems I got access to, because of the security programs I have access to, and those things. So I think it's now, before where it was it was a nice to have type thing being able to do that. For me, it's now being called out is we need to make sure we're doing that because of that level of access. That's how I see it from my side.
That makes a ton of sense. The one of the ways I've always approached this question is if we make things more context relevant, we can be more efficient with the employee's time that we've asked for.
Right.
So instead of carpet bombing them with this is everything that might be relevant to them, but we don't know, that might take several hours of a person's day, or maybe of a week or a month, whatever the time is. Whereas if we could look at that person's role, or ideally, it's a part of the security group that they have access to in Microsoft, and the tools that they have access to are dictated by their group membership, then you can train based on group. A whole lot of this you get for free if you properly manage access by default in Microsoft. We can demand less of that person's time to get
Exactly.
a equal or better benefit. So I think one of the benefits that you get is less of that person's time, and the risk of a one size fits all approach is that that individual starts to feel, I don't want to use the word like discarded, but not valued. It's like, why am I doing all this stuff that I know is not valuable time? And to go on Wayne's point earlier, I'm not talking about the stuff that's like, hey, this is relevant because your industry demands it. That is relevant, and that
Right.
person just needs to understand it. I
Right.
am talking about a one size fits all approach that would turn into is like, this actually has no relevance to me specifically. These people don't value my time. I'm not going to put any effort into this. That's a thought process I've actually talked to employees and heard them say back to me. So that would be the danger of continuing.
That's one of the biggest complaints in the market for that I run into is for security awareness training. When we start talking about delivering, they say, well, how do you do it? Are you going to waste my time with training that means nothing to me? So we hear that a lot from
Yeah.
various customers we bring on board, and that'll be some of the first things that comes out saying, are you going to make me have to do things that's just wasting my time? So it's still relevant today.
It absolutely is, and sometimes there's no way around. Hey, you're going to have to spend a specific amount of time doing this. I find that the easiest way to prevent issues like that from happening is a lesson I learned as a property manager right out of college, which is the first thing you should do as a property manager is go to the owner and set all the expectations. This is how I'm going to communicate. This is how I expect you to communicate. This is what I need from you. These are the timeframes I expect them on. And you've created like a spoken contract at that point. And any time you violate it or any time they violate it, now you have the freedom to go discuss it. Hey, we talked about this. You remember I said that you'd get back to me within 3 business days. And if not, I needed to do X, Y, and Z as a result. You can do a very similar thing with the employees when you do training, which is this is why it's important. This is why we're making you do it. This is how much time you can expect. If you don't do this, I'm going to have to get somebody. Eventually, they're going to figure it out. They're going to come. They're going to get on you for it. And then you're going to need to do potentially more because you missed everything. So
Yep.
Set it up front.
Clear expectations are always a great thing
Yep.
in any industry. So,
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to go to the next thing because y'all both hit on it of people being tired of the amount of training or, kind of getting into a training fatigue. So what signs of training fatigue should organizations watch for, and how can they make training feel less like a chore? Because you can
First
tell
thing I
them,
say is
this is required.
if you're tracking your training, the first sign is they're not taking it. They're not doing it.
Mhm.
Okay. And now you got to understand why and figure out what's going on. Is it, how you're doing the training, how you're scheduling the training, the content of the training, what's now all of a sudden you're seeing that they're not doing it. To me, that's probably the number one sign that you need to go address it is because it's not being done.
That's true. Could you repeat? There were two questions in there, and I got hung up on the first one, and I
Yeah.
totally forgot the second one.
Of course. Okay, so what signs of training fatigue should organizations watch for? It's the first one. And then how can they make training feel less like a chore?
Signs of training fatigue. I don't know if all platforms are able to give you this information, but you can tell how far behind people are in their training and how quickly or not quickly they complete training from the point that it's assigned and delivered to when it actually gets completed. So it's almost like measuring your sales cycle. It's like, hey, our average close went from 60 days to 120 days. Like, what is going on? It's evidence that maybe you have a gap in communication, or you're not being expedient, or it's not getting prioritized. Those conversations are not. So you could look at that. That would lead to exactly where Wayne was suggesting, which is like training's not getting done. What's going on? That would all get to that point. Things that you could do to make sure that it doesn't become overbearing or I want to use the word like I can't think of the word. It starts with an M.
Monotonous?
Monotonous. There we go. Uh, I knew it was I
I
knew
knew
it was
that.
an
I knew that English major come in play sooner.
I
Yeah.
was not an English major. I just was an English teacher.
Is you got to make sure people aren't doing the same content year in year out. That's somewhat easier to guarantee. The second thing is that there needs to be as much as right from the beginning, and you can reiterate this during the program itself. Why is this relevant to this individual? And sometimes the explanation starts and stops at industry requirements. Sometimes it goes deeper than that. And then it can get into you clicked on a phishing email, and it's not that we're giving you training to punish you, but here are sets of threats that are going to make their way to your email inbox at some point. You should be aware of them. And so some things that you can do is not just make it context relevant, but then there needs to be a way to take the time to explain to that individual. Sometimes it has to be done by hand because it's a very difficult thing to automate. And other times platforms can be very good at automating that kind of communication. We chose X because you demonstrated Y. And that'll get into a topic that is now being called human risk management, has for a couple of years, and it seeks to go above and beyond compliance and into how do we actually change people's behavior so that we can see an increase in security, which is it's a very different goal than just we're compliant. Our policy is going to pay out 100% guaranteed.
I think another thing we have to look at, because we gave the easy answer: training's not getting done, right? But there's another side of that where when training's getting done, but it's not being understood or it's not being absorbed, and you see the same pattern over and over and over and over again, that's another indication you need to go make a change or go do something in that too. And prime example is we had a client, this one individual, they would do the training and they would still, on the phishing simulation, they would click the link. I mean, come here, 9 times straight, retrained, click the link, retrain, click the link. And it's obviously like, okay, now there's another side of this story is not understanding, well, I guess, not understanding the content. What is it that's wrong with the content? Is it the content that's problem? Or is it they just don't understand what it is that you're explaining to them? They have a, there's something about it. It just doesn't click, right? So there's a other side of that is just because they're doing the training doesn't mean they learned it. And there's signs that you look for that says, okay, either I've got to change the content. Is it multiple people doing it? Or is it just the one and I need to go help that person understand and come into it? So there's a couple different ways to go approach that.
One of the something that happened to me in my childhood that I always bring to conversations like this is my mom always tells stories. She's like, "Yeah, I remember asking you to do chores as a little kid, and you just be like, "Yep, mom, don't worry about it. I'm gonna do it. Like, consider it done." She's like, "And I'll be damned if you just never did it." But I, but I would go away believing that it was gonna get like you were agreed, you were happy to do it, and then I'd forget for like weeks, and then I'd realize you'd never done it. And it's like, what was I doing there? It's like I knew exactly what I needed to say to make that conversation go away. Yes, mom,
Right.
I'll do that. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Consider it like I knew exactly what I needed to say. Did that mean that I was actually going to go do those things, or I was being honest about it? Not necessarily. And I had a different problem to solve, and so sometimes when I hear stories like that, I view it in a very similar way. It's like maybe this person actually doesn't believe, hey, just by clicking on this email and doing XYZ as a result,
Mm-hmm.
you could be the reason your business has to close for a week and figure this out, and that it's cyber insurance. Like you could be the reason all those tabletop exercises all of us should be doing behind the scenes have to get dusted off and then opened, and we all got to start it again. And I think there's a big disconnect. I think a lot of people just genuinely don't believe that because it's never arrived at their front doorstep. It's never been them in their email inbox while they were working. And so I guess this is all just a statement about actually explaining to that individual. It's like, look how this can happen. we are not being facetious. We're not overblowing the danger here. It's not that every email is going to be a threat that you need to analyze and be on guard consistently, but this is where threats will introduce themselves and they will damage your business.
100% agree with that.
So that kind of leads to, because we all know like human error is probably the majority of reason why things happen. Even though we can train them, there's still going to be human error. But how do you kind of combat that mentality with the human error of it's never happened, it won't happen to me. I've been doing it for however long and it's never happened. I'm never going to get a phishing email. So how do you combat the kind of human error mentality?
Well, one of the things I always go to, coming in with, I get people saying is, this ain't going to happen to me. Who wants my information? Who's going to do this to me? Right. I never thought I would meet Magic Johnson, but there's 6 degrees of separation between everything. And it's very simple. But also when people tell me that, hey, I'm a sole proprietor, why was anybody interested in me? I'm like, you're the number one person I'm interested in. And here's why. Is if I can get your information, you have a database of clients, right? Let's say you got 3 clients. I'm going to get those 3 and they have 3. Now I have 9 and those 9 have 3. Now I got 27 and it snowballs forward. So I'm coming into it and going, I get you, you're simple, and I can get to the big and I can get to more because you're the weakest point in the link. That's why I'm interested in your information. It's not just because you got $15K in the bank or $1,000 in the bank. I'm going to get that if I can. But that's just icing on the cake of me getting to the bigger boys through the change of 6 degrees of separation. Okay? So that's why you're relevant. That's why your information is what hacker wants. That's how I explain it.
I think a lot of people don't connect how much. I think it's a privilege for a lot of Americans to not realize how wealthy you really are. When you compare the standard of living, even for those who we would consider poverty stricken here in America, to genuine poverty in other countries around the world, very stark differences. So I kind of made a little facetious joke here in the chat. It's like, do you have more than $0 in a bank account or a credit card? But that really would mean that is enough resources for somebody halfway around the world, or maybe in your own country, to try and steal it from you. And there's really 2 things I'd like to say on this. One, a free resource, Verizon's Data Breach and Investigation Report, for DBIR for short. If you just Google that, put in your email and download I think it's like a 200-300 page PDF, if I'm being honest, you will get more information about what is actually happening around the world in cybersecurity, what kind of breaches are happening, why are they happening. And Katie, you had mentioned human error. That is consistently, I remember doing this research right before I started Phin, and shortly after, it was like, what amount of breaches for the last 17 years, which at the time was how long DBIR had been around, are accountable to humans making mistakes that their awareness training already trained them not to make? The answer for all 17 years was somewhere between 98% and 82% of breaches every year. It was shocking. And so I would highly encourage you, just go look at that. And that doesn't mean that the error was made by clicking on a link. It could have been that somebody else's email was already compromised, like you had alluded to earlier, Wayne. And then you didn't recognize that. You didn't follow the wire transfer policy when somebody emailed you to call that individual or walk to their office and verify face to face. That's also another error. You didn't follow a policy that was delivered to you on a yearly basis that you attested that you read and understood. That's a human error. And the second thing I'd like to say on this it's a really enlightening conversation I was having with a friend a couple of weeks ago, where I used to always make fun of those like Nigerian prince scams or long lost relative scams from around the world. And I was like, yeah, those are so dumb. Like, why would anyone fall for that? And I was talking to a friend, I was just brain dumping to this individual about all that stuff. And his answer was, well, Connor, that's actually the beauty of it. They will send that kind of attack. You and I are like, wow, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Who would fall for that? They'll send it to 10 million people around the world, right? You could go buy a list of 10 million email addresses for like $1,000 tomorrow. And then they'll find the 100 that'll fall for it. So it's a way for them to direct all of their resources to 100 people. It's like, I was like, wow, that is actually the best sales process I've ever heard of in my life. I whittled a 10 million list of no names to 100 hot leads who are going to do exactly what I tell them and buy my service, which basically just means let me steal from them. And that was a super eye-opening conversation for me because I was like, holy cow, that's right. Like, what would work on me? And they're just taking one that where the barrier to entry is so low that they'll just find 100 people, steal a couple $1,000s and be off to the races. But for businesses here in America, you can apply a very similar mentality. It's like, maybe these don't work on you, but there is something somewhere in the ether where, like, I always used to send fake Slack invites to my friends after I sent real Slack invites to my Slack channel that I wanted them in, and they'd fall for it 100% of the time. And why is that? It's because they were expecting it. They were already expecting it. Their guard was down. And so that there are examples that you can take of like, wow, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Who the heck would fall for this? The answer is somebody. Somebody will fall for it.
Yep,
And sometimes they're trying to get rid of the 9,999,990 people to get to the 100 that they should spend all their time on.
Okay. Let's change gears a little bit. So how do you measure whether a security awareness program is truly effective?
Oh, great question. The way that you normally would do it, there's a lot of people that do this. They'll do the training, but they'll never test. And I get the excuses of, well, if I send the test out, my employees get pissed off. I'm going, I'd rather be pissed off than hacked. So one of the purposes of you do the training, if you never test, what good is the training? Do you know if the training's working? Okay. Do you do like what Connor just said is, okay, I'll get it done and never do it. I just clicked through and went, right? But did I learn anything? We see that so many times where they come in and saying, oh, well, I can't send the test because they'll get mad. I was like, no, we're going to test because the testing and the testing part wasn't called out. Even in some of the audits we used to look at where they say, did you do the training? Click. Yes. Okay, good. But now if you look, are you testing on what you're training? So it's really, you must be testing and do that in a random fashion so you can understand if that person's going to click 9 times on the same exact test or not. Because you don't know unless you do. So to me, that's extremely crucial part. It's the most crucial part of the whole security awareness training program, because that's what validates if it's working or not, or if I need to adjust, educate more, educate less. What do I need to do?
I think I'm going to take a bit of a different approach to this. There are 100 different ways to measure the effectiveness of an awareness training program in terms of behavior change. And the one that's actually relevant is going to be super dependent upon the employees, where in the world they work and live, if they work remote or don't work remote, if they are at a small business or a large bit. Like, there are 1,000 factors to how should we actually measure productivity. Like, the way you'd measure productivity for your single proprietors that you work with is not the way productivity would get measured at an enterprise that you work with. And I think it's definitely not a one size fits all measurement.
Right.
So there's two things. One, the primary motivation to buy awareness training is still compliance. So it's like, how do you tell this is working? From that angle, it's a very simple question. Well, can I prove that we are compliant with the training requirements that we are required to go through immediately? If the answer is no, you don't have an awareness training program that's doing what it should, which is to maintain compliance.
Right.
On the other side, measuring human behavior, I will tell you two things that it is definitively not. It is not a phishing susceptibility percentage. And I will tell you why. I have talked to a couple hundred security professionals over the last couple of years, and I've asked them this simple question: how do you measure the productivity? A lot of them will say our phishing percentage. I'm like, great. If you sent different fishes in a different way right now, do you think you could get a higher fish percentage? And every single person's answer, 100%. I know exactly what I do. We have bonuses coming around at this time of year, and we do this, and then it's tax season, and then we do this. It's like, great. You don't have a symptom of progress. You have the exact kind of outcome that you knew you wanted from the start, right? So it's like fixing a race. You fix the race and you got the fixed outcome. That doesn't mean that this program worked in the way that you've just described. It means you got the outcome you want, which is fine. I also genuinely don't believe fish percentage is a great way to measure success there, but don't get me started on that.
We didn't.
Yep. We got
Don't get me
20
started
minutes
on that.
left, so just
So that's definitely one thing it's not. And the second thing it's not is the amount of people that I want to use the word complain, but that doesn't give it justice. There are a lot of people, employees, who will definitely say that they're not doing the training, and they'll do it because they feel slighted in some way. And so if you sat down and you tried to address every single individual's gripes that they may or may not have with the training, you'd never arrive. You're never going to arrive at a training program that is going to satisfy every single person in the company that you work with. So it's like there is a certain amount of satisfaction and context relevance that should matter. But if your goal was to get 100% satisfaction, you either only surveyed the people that you knew were going to say yes, or the people, again, checked out and just kept clicking buttons as they got the emails that said, hey, grade this for us. So to give you like a specific example, animated versus live action. Do not give lawyers animated content is something I found out. Like the majority of lawyers, they're just like, this is the most childish thing ever. I'm like, you go home and play video games. It's like, I'm not saying that any of those is good or bad, but like, did you even watch the content? It's like, I have. It's like, I am no better than you and you are no better than me. Like there's a certain sense of pride, and I get it. People don't want to feel like their time's being wasted, but
yeah.
You can't make everybody happy at all times. You just need to make it relevant.
Yep. I agree.
Okay. So you mentioned something that you don't think people should measure based off of like metrics and stuff. What should companies, what metrics should companies implement to ensure their training is making a difference?
I think the most important thing is that everyone actually gets it and does the training. I think that's number one. It's easy to measure, super easy to measure. Solving the problem is a very difficult and arduous journey in a lot of companies. But I think at least being able to measure, are people doing the training? Are they performing relatively well on the assessments? That's something that it's pretty binary. It's happening or it's not. So that's one thing. If not for behavior change and for maybe that light bulb moment that goes off in somebody's head at some point, you've at least guaranteed that cyber insurance the training requirements on cyber insurance is not going to be the reason a policy doesn't pay out, which is a big risk. If you think you've transferred all the risk to an insurance policy and it turns out you never did that, you just paid for it and you retained it all, that's a big no-no. That's a big no-no for a business. So guarantee that's not going to happen. In terms of other things that you should measure, how many times did you have to remind people on average to complete their training before it got completed? If you can measure those two things, you could start to spitball some ways that you can get people to do their training when it's assigned to make it more relevant. Maybe it's just announcements from leadership team members. There's a lot of things that you could do, but those are the two that I would measure.
Okay. Oh, I lost my place. There we go. Why do many training programs fail to create lasting behavior change, and how can organizations overcome that?
I would say from staying relevant, moving where your training content is evolving with the world that you're in and making sure it comes in, because if it's the same delivery mechanism, if it's the same framework of how you provide that information, it doesn't change, because the demographics of your user community is very diverse and it's always evolving. So if you're not targeting that training in a way that those demographics will actually use it, understand it, and being able to move forward, then you're going to lose them. At least that's from my perspective.
There are making it relevant is absolutely the number one way. And if I'll go back to a comment I'd made earlier about measuring productivity in businesses, making it relevant to a business is never going to look the same to any business you ever work with. And even the relevance can change as the business changes as well. So to give some pointers on things that you could do today, as opposed to hiring a set of full-time employees to manage a really effective training program that would go on and guarantee relevance. Start by splitting up the training. So if you know that it's a yearly compliance thing that needs to happen, or if you'd like a refresher yearly based on threats, don't do that all on one day a year and make people take an entire, like, it's like training for a test and then the information is just way out of your mind at that point. Or like learning for a test back in high school or college. So what I would say is, you don't need to go like all TikTok with it, or you give people like 6 seconds an hour or something like that.
Yeah.
Do a training, do 2 trainings, whatever that means for the company, every month, and make sure that those trainings are relevant to the time period they're given in. I'll give you a specific example, the love and extortion scams. A lot of those ramp up right about this time of year because we're right around February 14th when Valentine's Day is happening. I went into my bank the other day, and my banker was saying that they see it every year. They get notices internally at JP Morgan every year for them to watch out for people coming into the branch and being vehement about the love interest that they now have in this person they've never met who's asking for 10 grand or something like that. So I would say the thing that you could do immediately, if you're not doing, split it up over the course of the year. Make sure that the training, when it's delivered, is relevant to that time of the year. Around Christmas, you'll get a whole lot of scams for nonprofits that help the disenfranchised. If there is a current event, this is one thing that I've always advocated companies do. If there is a current event, and I always go back to the earthquake in Haiti, I think it was 2013, because I remember reading reports several years after of the number of Red Cross fake scams that got set up and then stole millions and millions and millions of dollars was like unseen before, as a result of people's willingness to give and help that, and then other people's willingness to take advantage of that. So anytime there's a current event, you could turn that into a, hey, make sure you've identified the right ways to delineate between the real and the fake opportunities here, and then send it when it's timely. Don't blast them though. Don't do several hours at a time. I'll check out. I do this stuff day in, day out, and I'm not.
It's human nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. What role does leadership play in reinforcing new behaviors and driving cultural change?
It's the job of, that's one of my primary jobs is, we as a leader in the company, you're setting a culture for the company that you're wanting to follow. And is everything that we do in the business part of our culture? One of the things about knowledgeable. How can you have a core value as part of what you're doing in your culture to be knowledgeable if you're not doing the things to be knowledgeable? Okay. So it's my job to make sure that we're following the very things that we say we're going to do, not for ourselves first. It starts here with me before I can ever lead anybody else to go off and do it. So we got to lead by example. You'll hear me use that term many, many times, but I got to lead by example. So when training comes out, is when I get it, I go do it. How can I expect anybody else to do it if I'm not going to do it myself? Okay. So when it comes into it is, we got to do those things because we're preaching we want to protect our environment. But if I'm not going to do the very thing that I'm asking my employees to do, what good is it?
Do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
To me, it's like do as I say and as I do, because I'm going to do it.
I think leadership's place is, I think 100% of the responsibility should fall onto leadership. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the hardest parts about leadership is prioritization. So there are 1,000 things as a business owner, or even as just an executive at a company, or even as an employee, that you need to juggle at all times, and figuring out what to prioritize when and how is welcome to life. That is the problem. And so I would say this: as a business owner, you're going to be juggling. Do I make my employees less productive when it comes to providing a customer outcome? And I'll get, this is a little bit of a false dichotomy, but I promise I'll get to it. By making them do this kind of training, or do I prioritize them not doing their training because, we're not going to get hacked and we just need to end up being more productive? So there's like that thought process that a lot of business owner has. But then there's another thought process on the other side. It's like, well, one of the outcomes we provide our clients is that they are secure, and we're not going to be the reason they get owned. Okay. well, what do you reasonably have to do? It's like something that my dad taught me is like, if you had to sit in front of a jury and explain what you've just done or what you were planning on doing, would you be proud or would you be like, shit, I really wish they didn't know about this? It's like, what would you say? And sometimes that's not the right question to ask yourself to make the right decision. But a lot of times I think that would be helpful. It's like if you were sitting down with your business owners and you were explaining to them, hey, this is what you need to do. And they're like, Wayne, you don't know what you're talking about. We're good. And if you ask them that question, it's like, well, you asked me to be a part of your cyber insurance renewal, and I was. And you said you were going to do all these things. Who's going to tell them that you're now like when I send you one thing that Brad Gross does, like declination notices. All right, that's fine. Great. You can do this. Price isn't changing, by the way. You're just not having these services, but also I'm going to send a notice and I need you to sign it that says you denied to do all of these things that I told you to make sure that you were compliant with XYZ. That's when it starts to really get, oh shit. It's like, well, I can't do that.
I'm a big believer in practice what you preach.
Yeah.
Okay. And one of the things is, even when I sit with customers, new prospects that sit and talk about potentially, doing business with us, I tell them, there's a lot of things we can do. We want to make sure we customize things to make your business successful. But there's one thing I will not do. And if you want to be a client of mine, this is non-negotiable. We will be doing cybersecurity. We will be doing the process that needs to be done because I have shared responsibility, shared liability. And what I'm selling you and what I'm putting in place for you is the very thing that we do for ourselves. So if I won't do it for me, how could I ever expect a client to do it? And It's the same thing from a leadership. If I'm not willing to do it, how can I expect anybody else to do it? But if I'm doing it because it allows us to serve our customers better, and if the customer does it, it allows them to serve their customers better, it's got to be equal. It's got to be the same. Okay.
Yep.
So I always look at it as practice what you preach.
One counterintuitive point that I'll bring up as a story here. Sometimes your job as a leader is to make sure your security team is not doing the wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a company that we had worked with that we still work with them, but they've stopped doing this, where they made fake phishing templates that promised people bonuses right around Christmas time. During this was like right when COVID started, so there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of financial stress, and then there was nobody in the room to be like, hey, maybe this went a little too far, and we shouldn't be promising Christmas changing money to people and then just being like, you idiot, we got you. You shouldn't be like, congratulations, you've got more phishing training to do. They did that. It went about exactly as well as you thought. And then one of the things that these people, like we ended up talking with them. We're like, well, I've heard this story before at other companies, but it had never been a partner that we had worked with. And it's like, yeah, like you just shouldn't do that. There should have been a leader in a room somewhere where this decision was made that was like, find another way. Find another way. Hey guys, we use.
You're being adversarial.
Yeah.
And intentionally adversarial, and you're that is not trying to educate. That's intentionally trying to catch someone at something without providing them the means to understand what you're doing. Okay, that if one of my people did that, they wouldn't like me.
Yeah,
let's put it that way, because that's not how you do things. We're here about education. Everything we're talking about right now is about education to help someone. And if you're not willing to do that, then maybe you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be in that role, because to me that's very unacceptable.
By the way, this is also a reason not to use phishing rate as a determiner for the success of your program, because that you will get security people who are like, I want to win, and I win by making this go up or go down. And then you've created competition, and that might something I say internally here is you will get exactly what you incentivize. So make sure that you are incentivizing exactly what you want. And so it happens all the time. It also happens in enterprises where they have teams of people dedicated to doing this stuff. So not to like smack people in the hands and be like, what are you doing? It's just like, hey, the goal is to educate. Is this educative?
Yeah.
I don't even think that's a word. Does this educate? Does this educate people?
And
if the answer, Yeah, what are we educating them with here? That they wanted more money to give their kids Christmas presents, and they
Yeah.
were susceptible to that kind of emotional appeal. I am too. Like, welcome to the club. We're human. Like, what's going
Yeah.
on here? This
Yep.
doesn't help us.
Yeah.
They don't need a
Exactly.
reason to hate security people. Don't give them one. They
Yeah.
already don't need a reason to hate you, so
Our
don't give them
job's
one.
hard enough as it is.
Yeah,
Don't make it harder.
Don't make it
Okay.
harder.
yeah.
Yeah. All
I think
right.
we got time for one more, don't we?
That's what I was about to say.
Oh, excellent.
So final question, kind of just as like a reflective piece as everything we've covered. What's the one piece of advice you'd give to organizations looking to overcome any security awareness drawbacks in 2025?
The one.
One. We have less than 5 minutes left, so yes, one.
Okay.
I can go if you want.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So I would say this: it's going to be super unhelpful to some people in the room. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. There are still many companies that I approach and that I work with who are starting in 2025 with zero awareness training, and they're starting a pro. So the first thing, sending nothing out is worse than doing nothing is worse than doing something.
Right.
I don't want to use the poorly, but mediocrely. So just start. If you haven't started, just start a program. Do something.
Yep.
To me, that's the best one as far as I'm concerned. But the one thing that I tell anybody is if you don't know what we're talking about, ask. Ask the question, are we doing this? Do you know if you're doing it at your company? Do you know if you don't, that most likely means you're not. Okay. And ask those things because the one thing I like to make sure people understand is, yeah, we're talking at a company and doing security awareness training, but as a leader and coming to that, not only is it taking care of helping protect my business or your business, but it's also added benefit for your employees for them to be able to protect them in just their normal everyday life. And aren't we here to help our employees to have a better life? To me, I'm all about that. So it's not just about you or the business, it's about the people in your business, your clients, everybody involved. So if you ask the question, am I doing this? And you don't know the answer, do just like Connor says, start, make that first step.
All right. Any parting words? Anything else? You got a couple minutes.
Hey, if you got
I,
questions, call us.
if you have started a program, so you're looking for step 2, I will say this. I talk with a lot of security awareness training professionals, a lot of security professionals. It's largely my job just to talk with them at this point. If the world had more empathy for other people's situations, we'd all be way happier. But a smaller subset of that, if we could somehow get more empathy for, I don't want to use the term like a non-security, non-technical individuals, the plight that they have in front of them. If we had more empathy for that situation, I promise you we'd be getting better results. So
No, absolutely.
find a way to be more empathetic. That would be advice to security
Yep.
professionals.
Get involved.
I think just
This
being
was
more
fun.
empathetic in general.
Yeah, very good advice in general.
Yeah, in general. Yeah.
So, Connor, was this better than just going through slides and talking about slides?
You guys are way more entertaining than Excel.
Hey,
Both of you.
I'll take it.
Well, to everybody that joined, I really appreciate y'all's time. And to Connor, I really appreciate you jumping on here. We really love working with Phin. It really fits into what our model, and it allows us to be keeping information relevant to our client base. So those of you that's been working with us, you know what we're talking about. Those that you're trying to make that first step or even that second step, or you just got questions, just reach out to us. Be happy to have a conversation. We'll talk about education. It won't be a sales process because that's what we're here to do. If we educate you, then things go the right direction. So with that said, hope y'all have a great week and look forward to talking to you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thanks, Connor.
Absolutely.